Hey dear, Zimzy here, and before anyone asks, yes, my background is different than usual because I am staying at my sister's for a few days, but I still want to wrap up the month of May and talk about all the awesome new releases that I read, and full disclosure, all of these books are provided to me courtesy of their publishers. However, as always, that does not impact my review. I just want to talk about books and give my honest opinion on each of them. And just in case you're into a certain genre or only want to hear about a certain book, I will mark the titles' names down below so you can click on whichever section you want to in this video. So let's start with, how about horror? Okay, the first book I have for you is The Children God Forgot, and I'm going to just read the dust jacket for you. A terrifying birth. A young woman is rushed to the hospital with stabbing pains in her stomach. The chief surgeon delivers a living child with the face of an angel and the body of a tentacled monster. The doctors are unanimous that the baby must die. An escape from the dark. Engineer Gemma is plunged into darkness in a tunnel beneath London. Before she escapes, a strange green light illuminates a cluster of ghostly figures. Gemma is certain they were children. A supernatural threat. DC Jerry Pardo and Diaz Jamila Patel of Tooting Police, that's a unique name, have investigated the cult before, but nothing as strange and horrible as what they must confront in the city sewers. Down here in the dark, where the dead come back to life, witchcraft is the only force strong enough to save you. And I was sucked in as soon as I heard this plot summary, and I had to read it because I love the occult and tentacled baby monsters. That sounded horrific. And I know I said earlier, I think in my Skyward Inn review, that Skyward Inn had the best body horror I had read in ages. Well, this book takes the cake. Like, it has some of the gnarliest, most grotesque descriptions I have ever read in a novel, and I don't say that lightly. Like, I love body horror, and this even made me squeamish. And like, if you want, I can give you a little taster of what the descriptions are like in some of the more graphic ones. I'm not going to read here. I'll leave that for you to read. But here we go. Then Gemma saw more reflections further down the tunnel, and more shining figures began to materialize out of the darkness. At least 5 or 6 of them. 2 of them were slender, like the child thing, with stick-like limbs, but the others were distorted in different ways. One was hunched, with a low, deeply dented forehead, and it dragged itself towards them, chin deep through the sewage, as if every step was a hideous effort. Behind it came a girl child who appeared to be disemboweled. Her looped intestines were hanging down and trailing in the sewage, and the bones of her ribcage were exposed. Above her clavicle, though, her neck was white and swan-like, and she had the face of a bleached pre-Raphaelite beauty with wavy reddish hair that defied gravity and flew up almost to the ceiling. Like, do you get that mental image in your head? It kind of reminds me of, was it Hanging Balloons by Junji Ito? But just, that is fantastic body horror, and I loved it. I loved that part. I will have to give a lot of content warnings with this book. It deals with pregnancy horror, like kind of like an Alien with like the chest thumpers. So if you're squeamish about that sort of thing, you might want to avoid that book. If you're like, you're squeamish, but you're like, yeah, like me, like, it makes me squeamish, but I love it because I'm a masochist. So if you're into pregnancy horror, you'll probably love this book. And I will say the one part that crossed a line for me, and I'll keep this as vague as possible, it deals with bad stuff happening to a cat, and like, for whatever reason, I am okay with almost anything in a book except for stuff happening to children or animals, and there is a graphic scene involving a cat that really disturbed me. That's where I draw the line. Everything else goes. And I guess moving on to what I didn't like so much about this book, I will say definitely the monsters were the star. Like, if you want to call it like a creature feature book, the monstrous children and the witchcraft element were awesome. However, I will say, because there are a lot of different POVs, I feel like I didn't like any of the characters and they didn't get as strong as a voice. So definitely the characters not so much, but the horror and ambiance and cringing, I'd say that made it a successful horror book. Okay, next moving on to the thriller category with the plot, and the plot of the plot centers around Jacob Finch Bonner, who is a disgruntled novelist who's working as a professor at a third-rate MFA program, and he has this really arrogant student who boasts that he has a fantastic idea for a novel, like, this will be a bestseller, and at first Jacob dismisses him until he hears the story, and it blows him away, and years pass, and Jacob is just waiting to see this story go onto the market. However, he hears that his former student has passed away, so he takes it upon himself to write that novel, and it becomes an instant success, and he goes on to all these talk shows and does all these tours with it until he receives a mysterious tweet that says that they know that he is a fraud. So then he becomes increasingly paranoid and tries to find the identity of this mystery person who knows that that book wasn't his idea. So yeah, first of all, I'll say that this is a really stellar premise. Like, it's dynamite. It's a really awesome idea. I hated the execution of it. Like, the author's writing style included constant interjections and constant exclamation points, and it drove me insane, and I nearly did not finish this until I think at a certain part in the book, like, that mannerism of like the snarky inserts from the narrator, they disappeared, and I preferred that part. I will say, what I did like is the premise of the author's all-consuming obsession. It's like Jacob felt like the story had to be told, and what matters most is the story, not necessarily who tells it. And I found it interesting with like the social media component and Jacob constantly like vanity looking, or whatever you want to call it, name searching his own name and seeing what other people say about him, and the paranoia. And that part was really fascinating to read about, and it kind of reminded me of the manga Downfall. So I love that. Just the writing style, not a fan of. However, if you can get past the writing style, this is a stellar thriller with an unlikable but fascinating main character. Okay, moving on to the sci-fi category, which is probably my biggest category this month. But first, I have what I would call soft dystopian called We Are Satellites, which is a book set in the near future where there is a new brain enhancement technology called the Pilot that essentially allows people to multitask and do multiple different mental activities at once. And as you can imagine, this is an obvious advantage at school or in the workplace. So it centers specifically around one family where the son gets a pilot so he doesn't fall behind in school. And then they also have a daughter named Sophie who has epilepsy, so she is ineligible to become a candidate for the pilot program. And then it follows this family over the span of years, and we grow with them and see the gradual social implications, as well as like on a smaller like familial level and relationship level, what is the gulf and bridges between people who have pilots and people who don't, and it creates this gradual divide, and it's really interesting to watch and see explored. So if you kind of like sociology experiments, I think you'll really enjoy this book. However, as I implied earlier, because this takes place over a long span of time, like maybe like a decade or so, this is definitely a slow burn, and probably my one complaint is that the ending does feel kind of rushed. There's a big revelation towards the end, and it's kind of wrapped up quickly. So my one issue is the pacing. However, this is still a really thought-provoking, fascinating book that explores the implications of new technology, and I think that's freaking awesome. Yeah. Okay, next we have one of my most highly anticipated sci-fi novels of the year, and that is Project Hail Mary by the same author as The Martian, and this book did not disappoint. So it follows Ryland Grace, who wakes up aboard a spaceship with two floating dead crewmates besides him, and he has no idea how he got there. However, slowly he starts to put together the pieces, and he realizes that he was placed in a medically induced coma, and he's on a mission to save Earth from extinction and an ice age. And yeah, I love me a good space thriller, and I think this book in particular puts a really interesting spin on the alien first contact trope. So, Earth's greatest threat isn't this man-eating alien that wants to harvest humans. No, Earth's threat is what's described as space algae that's eating up the sun's energy, so it's cooling down the Earth and causing a whole lot of climate issues and like tornadoes and all this scary weather and stuff, and gradually it's going to cause an ice age. And I think that's a really interesting problem to have, because you can't reason with space algae, like unless you have like space poison ivy to communicate with algae and tell it to go away. That's a really fascinating problem to have, and I love that this book focuses on like problem solving and celebrates kind of human ingenuity. And I will say kind of the dividing part for people about this book is the tone. So Ryland is very witty and sarcastic and funny, and I feel like you have to have that kind of humor when you're in space all by yourself, faced with like the enormity of it all and like overwhelming pressure. For me, that worked. For some people, it might throw them off, but for me, that's really a beautiful thing to have, like optimism in the face of despair. And I like having a hopeful book. So if you're looking for like a humorous space thriller in the same vein as The Martian, here you go. Yeah, Project Hail Mary. I will say the one negative thing about this book is that it gets heavy into scientific theory and scientific jargon, and some of it went over my head because I haven't taken a physics class in forever. But I was like, yeah, that sounds about right. But otherwise, yeah, it's a really enjoyable book that took me on an emotional ride. Like, even though it's humorous, it has a lot of heart too. So yeah, I really love this one. Okay, I have another humorous survival thriller for you called The Apocalypse 7, and this book centers around a college student named Robbie who wakes up on campus to find that he appears to have slept through the apocalypse. Like everything outside has overgrown vegetation, and even the animals, like the wild animals, they are oversized now and roaming the streets, and the weather is extreme and changes from like tornadoes to hailstorms at the drop of a hat. Everything seems slightly off here, even the stars. So he's eventually able to gather together 6 other survivors of humanity, hence the name, the Apocalypse 7, and together they try to piece together what on earth happened. Where's the rest of humanity? Yeah, I will say that I really appreciated that this was a lighter interpretation of the apocalypse as opposed to like the really grimdark apocalypse stories like The Road, which are really depressing. This was an enjoyable adventure, and I feel like the character cast is really eclectic and likable. However, my issue with this story was probably its execution. There's the POVs of all 7 apocalypse survivors, and I feel like having 7 POVs for that short of a novel was unnecessary, and it really broke the momentum of the story for me. And along with the pacing, I feel like there was a huge revelation at the end. Again, I feel like it was wrapped up really quickly. Like it opens up a huge can of worms, and I had so many questions that weren't addressed that I would have liked to have more time figuring out. So that is my one complaint, but yeah, it's still a fun, refreshing take on the apocalypse. Okay, the next book is unfortunately one of my biggest disappointments of the year, and that is The Ones We're Meant to Find, which revolves around 2 sisters trying to cross the ocean that divides them, and I just fell completely in love with the cover, and I wish I loved the inside of the book as much as the cover. So the book is told from 2 alternating POVs. There is the sister C, who wakes up on an island with no memories, no recollection of who she is. All she knows is that she has a sister named Kay, who she must get back to. And then we have, on the other hand, the sister named Kay, who is a STEM prodigy genius living in a biodome that basically where people live in stasis pods in virtual reality to kind of offset their carbon footprint. But there's some interesting technological things going on there. Like, it was compared to Black Mirror, which I understand with like the virtual reality component, and I really thought it was an interesting idea to explore. Like in the biodome, people are given a program app in their brain or something called Silver Tongue, and it gives word suggestions, like phrase suggestions, while you're talking to other people. And I feel like, you know, like when you go to Gmail and you're given suggestions for what to write in an email, it's kind of like that, only in real life conversations. And I thought that was a really cool bit of social technology to explore. And I will say, what kind of peeved me was that there's so many cool like technological aspects of this book to explore, and climate aspects, because this is kind of like eco-fiction. However, that wasn't fully explored. Instead, the part that bothered me was that basically there's kind of a love interest given to both sisters, and I thought this was a book that was going to be about sisterly love, and we have these unnecessary distractions. Yeah, the story had so much potential and so many thought-provoking, poignant angles and directions it could have gone, but instead it chose to focus on awkward romance drama. So that's why I'm so disappointed in this book. If you had a better experience, let me know down below in the comments. Some people liked it, I might be the odd one out, but that's how I felt about it. Okay, last but not least, I have a sci-fi novella called The Impossible Resurrection of Grief, and to be honest, this story is a little bit hard to describe, but I'm going to do my best here. So it centers around a psychological phenomenon called the grief that occurs in the near future when there are collapsing ecosystems and mass extinctions, and it basically causes this overwhelming melancholia, and it manifests in different ways for different people. For instance, one woman tries to resurrect the thylacines, another man tries to create these robots of like this one subspecies of wrens, and another woman becomes obsessed with plastic and calls herself the Sea Witch. And our main character, Ruby, is a biologist who focuses on jellyfish because they are super hardy and adaptable and not prone to die off. And basically, the story follows her interacting with different people and looking at different responses to all these dying species. And there is this interesting interwoven component of fairy tales mixed with sci-fi as allegory, and it's just a really artsy, fascinating story to read and super thought-provoking. I will say my one issue is the length. It's super short even for a novella. Like, one second, I'm gonna look up the oh, okay, I'm back. It is 82 pages, which is even short on the novella side, and I feel like it was almost an outline for a novel. Like, it's the beginning of an idea that I would love to see explored further, like almost like in a full novel format if the author decides to revisit the idea down the road, because it's super interesting and it kind of reminds me of Jurassic Park, and it explores the idea of, should we resurrect? Can we bring back something, a species, once it's dead? What is the impact of reintroducing an extinct species like the woolly mammoths or dinosaurs? What would happen? And I think that's a really neat idea. I just wish we got more of it. Anyways, those are all the books and novellas I read for the month of May. If I missed any of your favorite new releases, let me know down below in the comments. If you made it this far in the video, thank you. You're my little pog champ. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you on the flip side. See ya.